Okay, this is 100% true, even though most people I tell this to in real life don't believe me. When I was really little, my parents would let me stay up late on the weekends and watch TV until I fell asleep. I really loved these times, and I would stay up later than anybody else just because I could. Well, one night I was almost asleep on the couch when I heard a noise on our front porch. It was the sound of our old-fashioned porch swing moving back and forth. I was a little scared, so I crept toward the bay windows of my living room and peeked out toward the porch. Sitting on my front porch swing was an older woman, probably in her 50s, wearing nothing but a nightgown, covered in blood and holding a huge kitchen knife. I flipped out immediately and ran screaming into my parents' room but was too terrified to form words. My parents saw that I was upset, but when I finally was able to tell them what I saw, my dad got really angry and told me that it was just a dream and to go back to bed. I refused and kept crying and screaming until he had had enough, and snatched my arm and dragged me toward the front door to prove that nothing was there. I kicked and screamed all the way, trying to make him stop, but he kept pulling me. Finally, we got to the door. He unlocked it, swung it open, and said, "See, there's nothing that..." To this day, I have never seen the look of fear and shock that was on his face when that woman turned and stared at both of us, and slowly stood up with that knife. My dad slammed the door shut and got my mom to call the police while he went and got his gun. He went back to the door with a 12 gauge and cracked the door just enough to stick the barrel out. He asked her what she was doing and she said, "Somebody killed my husband, but it wasn't me." My dad told her that the police were coming and she freaked out, grabbed the knife, and walked away. The police found her 15 minutes later trying to break into one of our neighbors' houses. I never slept in the living room again. Oh yeah, I nearly forgot that after she left, my dad called and warned my crazy uncle who lived next door about what was happening. Apparently he was waiting on his front porch with his shotgun when she walked by. He pointed it at her and just said, "Keep moving, bitch." Update. I just talked to my mom and she said that they never really found out the whole story. But apparently she was crazy and off her medication. Her and her husband got into a fight and she tried to attack him with the knife, but didn't seriously hurt him. When he got her out of the house, she cut herself with the knife, either trying to commit suicide or make it look like her husband did it. The police never talked to us about it, so that's just what they heard from the woman's neighbors. When I was younger, we frequently visited my grandparents around holidays, even though we didn't live in the same town. My aunt lived 2 houses down from my grandparents. The lady in the house between was creepy. She was a large woman, over 6 feet. She wore logging chains around her neck, a dress, and work boots. The only time I remember seeing her outside was either in her garden in the back or when she was washing the outside of her house, scrubbing the actual building. She did this often. During these times, she would yell at us kids and call us all kinds of things. She would tell us the devil would be coming for us. The adults told us to leave her alone and to avoid her. We would run the distance between my aunts and my grandparents because, when you passed by, she was watching out the windows. It was creepy, and we never went alone. One Halloween, one of the cousins dared us to trick-or-treat her house. I remember how scared I was, but I didn't want to be a chicken. Plus, I was going with the group. One of us rang the doorbell, and there was a lot of banging noises in the house suddenly, like doors slamming. When she answered the door, she had several heads in her hands, and we all went screaming. The adults told us it was a Halloween prop, and we knew we shouldn't be bothering her and deserved to be scared. About a month later, my parents got a phone call that this lady had tried to kill my aunt while she was bringing in groceries and had my young cousin in her arms. The lady had one of those rope saws and had come up behind my aunt with it. She put it over her head around her neck and proceeded to saw. My aunt naturally flipped and started kicking the door. My uncle came and beat the lady down with a fire poker. The police investigation revealed that the woman had been digging tunnels under her home, which were coming up under my aunt's, my grandparents', and another neighbor's house. She had been bringing the dirt up and putting it in the raised beds of the gardens. She also had a shrine of some sort underground, which had a few severed heads around it. My aunt survived, by the way, but has a long scar around her neck. My wife and I bought our first house in February of 2010. We immediately fell in love with it as soon as we laid eyes on it. It had everything we wanted, plus a few extras. For the first month, everything was great. Lots of painting and decorating, getting it just the way we wanted. Then, weird things started to randomly happen. First, it was small things, like things upstairs being moved, put in completely different rooms than where they belonged. I chalked it up to my wife just forgetting to put things back where they belonged. The house also started to creak pretty loud. This is a fairly new house, so I figured it was probably settling, as most new houses tend to do. One day the wife and I were preparing dinner in the kitchen. Our stairs sit right next to the kitchen entrance, so any noises upstairs were clearly audible in the kitchen. I turned off the water at the sink, and as soon as I did, we both heard a cough. We have no kids, and no one was visiting. The windows were all shut. The television was not on. This sent the coldest chill down my spine, and I could feel the blood running out of my face. I looked to my wife, and she too had gone pale and had this look of absolute fear. Someone was in our house, and they were upstairs. I quickly grabbed the sharpest knife I could find, and my wife called the police. I walked to the bottom of the steps and stood silently and heard a loud pop, creak, just like the ones I had always heard the house make. My hands were shaking, and my wife was whispering to the 911 operator, telling them we think we may have a robber in our home. The police arrive in minutes. Thankfully, they had been patrolling nearby. The officer walks slowly up the stairs, gun drawn. He calls out, "This is the police. Is anyone upstairs?" No response. I'm right behind him, walking up the stairs. We look into the first bedroom and closet. Empty. No one in the half bath either. Last room is my office where I have my PC. No one in the room or the closet. I felt the tension ease away, and I felt like a complete tool, making this officer search the house, only to find nothing. We turned to walk out of the room, and right above us, I just about shat bricks. In my office closet, there is an attic access. The officer pulls the steps down and again calls out, "Is anyone up there? This is the police." No response. He turns on his flashlight and peeks his head up. He finds a man in his 40s, kneeling there in the attic, looking dead at him. Gun drawn, he tells the man to come out and put his hands behind his head. They arrest the man. He didn't say a word the whole time and wouldn't look anyone in the eye. He was scruffy looking and had dirty clothes on. Me and my wife were freaking out. I don't think either of us have fully gotten over it. After questioning the man in the police station, we found out that he was a homeless man who found refuge in the house while it was still on the market. He said the doors were unlocked, and so he stayed there. Apparently, a realtor must have forgotten to lock the door after showing someone the house. He said that when people would come to the house, he would hide in the second-floor attic. We bought this house, and the guy was living in it for a whole month without us even knowing. It really freaks me out, still just thinking about it. I've included photos where appropriate because otherwise the descriptions of everything go on and on. I hope this is okay with everyone. When I was 11, my family of 6 decided to make the move from suburbia to a lovely rural bungalow. I have 3 sisters aged 9, 12, and 18 at the time. We were all excited for the privacy and isolation of our new home. For once in our lives, we would have no neighbors and a large yard to play in. Our home had large picture windows giving us a beautiful view of the farmland around us. My parents disliked curtains because there were no neighbors and they collect dust, so we all figured, what's the point? The summer there was so much fun. Every morning I would get up and take my dog for a walk around the woods in our backyard. I absolutely adored the feeling of being alone, and was enjoying the freedom of all our new space. Fall eventually rolled around, and I continued my routine of walking my dog both in the morning and after school. I remember one morning while walking my dog, I began feeling uncomfortable. I was alone in the woods. There was no one around, but I still felt as though I was being watched. I had shivers down my back the entire walk, and for an 11-year-old, I just felt really strange. My dog was acting weird too. I kept trying to go further into the woods, but she kept trying to pull me towards our shed. The shed rested at the very back of our yard on the edge of the woods where the trees thin out quite a bit. I didn't like how I was feeling, so I picked up my dog and brought her back to the house and went on with my day. Days went by and I just couldn't seem to shake this feeling of being watched. Especially when I was in my bedroom, which had a huge window in it that overlooked our backyard. The view of the woods that I had previously loved was beginning to scare me. I assumed it was just because it was fall, and the forest started to look kind of gloomy. I started having nightmares about waking up in the middle of the night and seeing the figure of a man in our backyard. Weird things kept happening around our house. We all suddenly noticed that we were eating things like bread a lot quicker. Every morning half a loaf of bread would be gone, and my parents attributed this to their hungry growing children. One evening, I woke up and heard noises coming from the family kitchen, which was just down the hall from my bedroom. It sounded like someone had come home, and I assumed it was my oldest sister. The only thing that was strange was her footsteps sounded a lot heavier than they usually do. The noise stopped very quickly, and I was able to fall back asleep. In the morning, my mom asked me and my 2 sisters, 9 and 12-year-old ones, if we woke up last night to make food. We all said no, and then I asked if it was my oldest sister. My mom told me that she stayed at her friend's house last night, and then thought it was probably the dog making noise. I was terrified. I knew I heard unfamiliar footsteps. That night I had a lot of trouble sleeping. I still felt like someone was watching me. Eventually I had fallen asleep but woke around 2:30 a.m. I heard noises in the house again. It was the same footsteps I had heard before. I stayed in my bed and felt paralyzed. I rolled over and faced the window, hoping that if someone came in my room, they'd think I was asleep. The noises stopped, and I closed my eyes as hard as I could. I told myself I was just imagining things, and that monsters aren't real. About an hour must have gone by, and I eventually opened my eyes. When I looked out the window, I swear to God, I could see a man standing in our backyard watching our house. The photo contains a cheesy edit of where I saw him. I was terrified enough that I didn't move at all and eventually fell asleep again. I was so relieved to wake up alive that morning, but was still terrified of our backyard. I ran into the kitchen to tell my mom what I saw and refused to walk the dog. I'm not sure if she really believed me at the time, or thought I was having night terror hallucinations, which I did have quite often when I was younger. I went to school that morning. I was anxious all day. The last thing I wanted to do was go home. When I did get home, I saw police vehicles surrounding the house. They had the dogs with them and were searching our yard. They told us a man who had broken into another home and beaten the couple living there was suspected of being on our property. He stole their wallets, photos, and other small items of value. The biggest thing he stole was their car, which had been ditched 10 kilometers from our home. While searching our property, they found all the items from his previous break-ins hidden around our yard. They also discovered that he had been hiding in our shed since his previous break-in. They said he had done this at the previous home prior to breaking in. He would spend time watching the house and observing the residents' routine, until he knew it well enough to start coming inside the house. They said he had a long history of premeditated violence, including child abuse, and believed he was planning on eventually harming us. In the shed they found wrappers, empty cans of food, and scraps. They told us he was definitely coming into our house for food during the night. From the shed, he had a perfect view of our home, and could see when we all went to bed. Although they searched our house and property with the dogs, they didn't find him. After that day, I realized that if you feel like you're being watched, you probably are.